To introduce you to Yshai Boussi. He is a therapist in Portland, and I was able to watch him facilitate this training a couple of months ago, and while I was sitting there, I was thinking, ooh, this is the guy I want to bring here to talk to you about electronics. So please join me in giving Yshai a warm welcome.
Thanks. All right, lots of technology involved here. How ironic. So I was just using the restroom and I was promised that my mic wasn't on, and it wasn't, and so that's good. And I saw the sign about boogers are for tissues and not for walls, so I'm going to need to get that for my house. I think it's a great idea. I need to remind my kiddo. I have a 5-year-old son and a 9-year-old daughter at home. Can you hear me okay? Is this okay? The sound, we good? Okay. All right, cool. So I'll tell you just a little bit about me before we get started and jump into this. My name's Yshai Boussi, like the letter E and then Shai, Yshai. I'm a therapist in private practice. I got my master's degree in marriage and family therapy in 2003. Prior to that, I worked in community mental health with at-risk youth for a long time, for about 3, 4, 5 years. And I've worked in community mental health after that as a family therapist. And I've been in private practice for about 10 years, specializing in working with adolescents, parents, families. I also see individual adults and couples, but my focus and my area of expertise, I guess, if I can use that word, is adolescence. It's a period I'm really interested in. I work a lot with parents. I do parenting groups for kids, lots of workshops and talks like this. I do trainings for therapists as well. It's a topic, this is something that I enjoy talking about. So this talk specifically is one that I've put together because, as you can imagine, over the last few years, it's just been this dramatic increase of like parents pulling their hair out, right? Like, what do we do about these phones? They're like destroying our family, our kid. Like, I want to throw it out the window. This thing is like the bane of our existence. And no one knows what to do. I don't either. Often I'm like, I don't know. I get it though. You're right. Like, what do? We got to figure this out. And it's just like parent after parent after parent after parent, just like feeling like, I don't know what to do. This is really stressful. Like there's a lot of worries and concerns, and so, we're here. There's other issues we need to address: anxiety, stress, depression, other mental health issues here. But this phone thing, and not just phones, but all the other devices, like they're playing a part here. Something's not great. Something's not working. But at the same time, we can't not have them. I mean, they're here, right? So there's just this dilemma. So, and I don't know either. No one really. I mean, we're all figuring this out as we go. I mean, we're all kind of amidst, especially our kids. These kids, it's a laboratory experiment, right? That they're all mice in. We're all figuring this out as we go. And so I decided I'm going to really try to learn what I can about this, and so I can be more helpful, because I didn't know how to be very helpful before. And what I talk about today might be less relevant in a year from now, because this is just changing all the time, right? So I hope to be helpful, but not in a way that you might expect. I'm not going to tell you what to do. I'm not going to tell you what's wrong or right, or because that would be, silly. That's not reasonable. Every family is different, and you're going to need to take what I present and figure out how that works for you and your kids. So there is no one-size-fits-all approach. Every kid is different. Kids have different temperaments and personalities, and they can handle different things. Every family and your culture and your values are going to also play a part. So I also want you to know that along those lines, there's no judgment from me at all. So you might be doing this, you might not. You might be having your kid, be on their device for hours and hours a day. You might not have any devices. There's no judgment here about what you're doing or not. But what I do hope, I think good parenting is really about reflection. It's about adapting. It's about being curious and open to the cards that have been handed to us, not what we wish we had or not what we used to have. So you guys are all here because you are good parents and you care. Otherwise you wouldn't, you took the time to do that. So I really respect that and you taking the time. So I hope you find this helpful. So there's that. Okay. Let's see. All right. I took too long before switching screens. Devices. Says no input is detected.
Is this an experiment?
This is an experiment.
I'm waiting. Here's the experiment. I'm waiting to see how long it takes for somebody to pull out their phone because they're bored.
I think that the power we plugged it into isn't power. I think it died.
It died. No?
It died.
Well, that's an easy fix.
All right, so flexibility and adapting. Let's start. We're going to keep going. What the first slide is about is adolescence. So I want to first just introduce this concept of adolescence so we have the same language. Oh, that was quick. Nice. Okay. Can we do full screen mode? Oh, present. There you go. Thank you. All right. Okay, so let's talk about adolescence and what adolescence is, and then we're going to talk about why this is this doesn't quite fit. I'm going to get here in a minute. But first off, so adolescence is a transition to adulthood. Starts at puberty, ends when they're ready to be and able to function in the community as independent adults. Families, careers, autonomy. That period has extended and is longer and longer and longer and longer. Puberty has started at earlier and earlier ages. Marriage and adulthood is extended pretty far out, right? So what we're talking about here is we're not talking about, all right, 3, 4, 5 years, let's get them out of here. You guys are in this for a while, so get comfortable. But don't worry, it's not bad news. So it is an extended period, but there's also some exciting things to know about that. But I do think it's important to kind of keep that long view, because when we get caught up on like our 15-year-old or our 14-year-old or our 16, and we get really worried because they might not be doing as well as we want them to be doing, or maybe they're doing not well at all. And we get worried because we think there's this arbitrary 18 number that really is just kind of a legal thing. We got to not get caught up on 18 because they have a lot more years where they're still maturing and developing. So when we kind of think like, what are we going for here? We're not going for them to be like an amazing 18-year-old because they're not done. We're really looking for the end of the game is mid-20s, late 20s. That's when we want them to really have it together. So our job is to really take advantage of this period to help them put the pieces together. And it's going to be different for every kid. Development is really uneven. So cognitive, like academic thinking, emotionally, socially, morally, all these different types of development happen at different times for different kids. Physical maturity, as we know as well, right? So I want to kind of maintain that perspective. So when we're talking about adolescence, we're talking about roughly around 12 and all the way up. For the purposes of this, we're really going to be looking at 12 to roughly 17, 18, 19 primarily, but we can apply a lot of this because 20-year-olds now, 21, 22, they're still figuring a lot of stuff out in a way that maybe 16-year-olds were 20 years ago. And that's okay. That's actually okay, as long as we can really help them develop skills and have new experiences and not just kind of quit on life and just hang out. So as long as they're learning new things and having new experiences, I think that's fine. Here's the thing. So over the last handful of years, so the iPhone came out in, I think, 2007. And so social media was really kind of hitting stride around 2010, 11, 12, 13. It started, and then it's just kind of gradually peaked. Well, I don't know that this is a coincidence, but if it is, it's an odd one. So from 2007 to 2015, suicide rates have increased by 31%. They've doubled for boys. Boys' depressive symptoms increased by 21% from 2012 to 2015. Girls increased by 50%. Over the last 10 years, hospital admissions for suicidal teenagers have doubled. Also, I want to say, Jennifer, I forgot to send you handouts early so that you could print them and get them.
We can link them onto our wellness webpage, and they can always go there and get them.
Okay, so I'll get those out. I'm sorry that, because I know it's nice to have that to follow and jot notes on, so I'm sorry I didn't get those out, but we'll get those to you. Okay, so you can just enjoy and just listen, and then we'll get hard copies of all the, some of the data and the resources and stuff like that to you. I'll get that to you tomorrow. And I'm seeing this too. So there's really, anxiety rates are up, depression, suicide. There's a lot of reasons to be concerned. And the timing is very interesting because it is coinciding with this rise in social media use. By the way, this isn't an anti-tech talk either at all. I just want to make that really clear. Technology is awesome. I love my phone, like we all, most of us do. It's here to stay, and it's a great tool. So this is not, get rid of phones. I'm going to be really clear about that. This is really about using our tools, using them for what they should be, which is tools to help make our lives better and help make the lives of our kids better. So sometimes we can be curmudgeons about technology and devices, and when we do that, we lose credibility with our kids. So. Another study, the Higher Education Research Institute at UCLA asked incoming freshmen if they felt overwhelmed by all I had to do during the previous year. They've been asking this question for a while. 1985, 18% said yes, they did feel overwhelmed by all they had to do. So that would have been their senior year. 2010, 29% said they did. 2016, 41%. Said they felt overwhelmed. So more and more kids are feeling overwhelmed. There's a lot of studies and surveys around this on stress, and kids are reporting feeling a lot of stress and expecting a lot of stress as well. Let's see, this is banging against here. Okay. All right. Here's the first video. I'm going to show you how this works. Yeah, it's blue. Is that good? Okay. Yeah. Okay. It's all good.
It has to face what way? Help Megan.
While we're this is a good time for me to tell you about something. So we created a wellness page on our Camas School District website. And if you go to the Camas School District website and the school and resources, there's an all-school wellness page. And on that page, you'll find videos of all the speakers that we bring in, so we'll archive them. So if you want somebody to watch something that's happened, you'll be able to do that. There'll be links to articles and books that we're recommending and reading. So if you're interested in upcoming events, it will have like an ongoing calendar of things.
Just put it there, just do it that way. Okay. And then just put it back on here. Okay.
Find out around wellness and social emotional
Okay.
issues. So, there you go.
All right. Thanks, Jennifer.
Sure,
I think that gave us just enough time.
Thank you. Yay. Is that gonna work? Yeah.
Sounds quiet.
Thanks.
Gonna be good enough?
I think so, hopefully. All right, so we're going to cover these things as we go. All right, is that okay? So this part is just, it's about, you know, the research and the information, and we're gonna go into more specifics. But the last piece on this, well, one of the last parts, this data. Is Jean Twenge is a researcher. She has a book called iGen. I don't know if you guys have heard of that. But she writes, she's a researcher and writes and has looked over some of the research on teen behavior and happiness. And so this was published in the Washington Post and some of her data, and this is what she found. So this is the degree of correlation between happiness and time spent on an activity. So she found a positive correlation between happiness and time spent on offline activities. So sports and exercise had the most positive correlation. In-person social interaction, religious services, print media, homework even. It's interesting, surprising there a little bit. Kids might disagree. But I think maybe with homework, you know, as much as they complain and bicker, when they are doing it, this is my theory, and they're like productive, they actually kind of feel good. They're learning, they're stimulated, they feel like they accomplished something. So that's what I would guess about that. Alternatively, these correlated negatively with happiness, these activities. Least is reading news online, TV, video chat, texting, social media, computer games, and just general internet. I'm not sure what that means, but so the message here, of course, isn't get rid of all technology, and I think that the theme of this is really balance, right? It's going to come down to balance. So if they're on their devices a lot, are they also doing offline stuff? If they're spending time online with friends, are they also offline with friends? Are they having enough activity, physical activity? So I think, to me, that's one of the important take-homes out of this data and the research is there needs to be balance. And that's one thing to kind of consider if we're factoring in how much screen time should they have, which really we're going to be getting away from screen time because it's just becoming so ubiquitous, right? I mean, everything's on screen. Homework's on screen sometimes. So it really has to be more specific. They're going to spend time on their device. Well, what did they do? Have they been out on a hike all day and playing sports at tournaments or something? Well, then maybe they can spend some time on their devices because they've been, right? What have they been doing? And I think really kind of having that mindset of balance is really important. We can't talk about adolescence without talking about the brain. So this is all of our brains. But there are some really unique factors about adolescence that is so important to know, and they need to know. Like, I always want kids to know this about their brains and what's unique about it. This is both the problem and the opportunity that comes with adolescence. So, a few significant parts to know about, just a few. The prefrontal cortex. Most of us know what that is at this point. Most kids have learned about that in health or science. So that's executive functioning. That's the part behind the forehead. That's reasoning, logic, all that stuff, right? That stuff that they're capable of doing when they're capable of doing it until they're not, right? So the prefrontal cortex is when your kid acts like their age, and sometimes even older. They're using their prefrontal cortex when they can have conversations, solve problems, thinking critically. The prefrontal cortex is our filter to our emotions. So for us, this is the part that's done maturing at by roughly around 25. So for us, ideally, when we get angry or frustrated or we're having a hard day, we can think through that day. We can think through our feelings a little bit and kind of put it into context, right? Take deep breaths, like take a warm bath, talk to somebody, put it in perspective, like, well, that person was probably having a bad day, or, tomorrow I'm looking forward to that, or, it just happens, it's life. I'm thankful for for other stuff going on. We can do that, and that buffers our emotional response, right? Well, absence of prefrontal cortex, what we're talking about here is a remodel. This part of their brain, this specific part of their brain, is under construction. It's being remodeled. So it's kind of gutted a little bit. And so particularly the younger they are. So they often don't have that filter. So experiences and events often go right through to their emotional system without that filter. So that's why kids, especially young teens, but all of them, are super emotional and can get really intense. Because they're not able to filter their experience in real time. Often. Sometimes they can, right? But because this is very inconsistent, that's why sometimes I think it can be helpful to think of these kids as whatever their age is plus or minus 5 years at any given moment, right? That's why sometimes you're like, oh my gosh, you're amazing. My kid is like a star, like so mature, like, holding conversations with adults and doing incredible projects and leadership. And then they come home and they just are like a puddle of like an 8-year-old, right? That has a lot to do with it. Okay? So the prefrontal cortex is important. And I want them to know that too, right? Like, you're not crazy, because they feel so out of control as well. To be fair for them, like, they don't know why they do it. When they're mean to you and they lose their cool, which they do that to you more than anyone else, by the way, they all do because they feel safe. And they can. And sometimes they're just unloading and they need a place to do it. They don't like it either, and they feel bad, but they don't really know what's going on with them a lot of the time, why they get that way. Well, this is one reason why. The other part is their amygdala. So the amygdala is fight, flight, freeze. It's in our emotional limbic system. So our amygdala when our amygdala is activated, sometimes we call it an amygdala hijack, it takes over. And so when that happens, that's a real primitive part of us, right? That we share with other mammals. So when our amygdala is going, then we're not able to think. It's amygdala or prefrontal cortex. Which one? So oftentimes, your kiddo they're activated, they're triggered and they're defensive, and so their amygdala is activated, in which case, that's why they're not, one of the biggest mistakes we make as parents, I do this too, is our kids in their amygdala, right? And we know it. They're tense, or they're super defensive or shut down, or they're like on edge, right? Or they're like being rude, and then we start to like talk to them as though they can reason, right? You need to calm down. Go take some deep breaths. If you keep doing this, then this is going to happen tomorrow. And here's what I need you to do instead. And what I want, let's talk about this. You're not being reasonable. Come here. No, don't walk away from me. Get back here. We're going to talk about this. And so it never works. Never works. But we do it anyways. And what happens? They get more amped up, right? Because they're in this like really primitive primal mode. And we're like that too, let's be honest, with like our partners and other people, and sometimes our kids activate that and we're in our amygdala mode, right? And then it's amygdala to amygdala. It's not pretty ever, right? So it happens, but the more we can be aware of it. So we have the prefrontal cortex to buffer that for us. They sometimes do and sometimes don't. You just aren't going to know. Part of what we want to do, though, and what we're talking about here is like giving them as much environmental support and tools so we can strengthen. I mean, this developmental period adolescence is really about strengthening the prefrontal cortex, right? Getting them better at reflecting, at problem solving, at thinking, right? At empathy, at putting themselves in other people's shoes. These are advanced skills that are going to be the difference between how they are as adults, right? How functional and successful and happy they are. The hippocampus is learning and memory. That's in the same region. So that is responsible for our ability to take in information, to remember, and to just learn from our experiences. Chronic stress impacts our hippocampus. So kids who have undergone who are chronically stressed out, they're not learning nearly as much because that part of their brain is suffering. Here's a very important and I think interesting part that's unique to the adolescents. We all know what dopamine is, right? Dopamine is that feel-good chemical we get when we're anticipating a delicious dessert, or we have a good workout, or we're hanging out with friends, or we're going to go on a fun trip, or we know what dopamine is. Well, we have dopamine, and it gives us that sense of reward, right? We're looking forward to something. Well, adolescents have dopamine too. They have a lot more of it than we do. Adolescents really, really get a lot of dopamine in response to experience. They release much more dopamine than we do, than children or adults do in response to their experiences. So the implications are everything feels better for adolescents. Everything, like sugar is sweeter. Literally, the studies show that. They experience that as being sweeter. And so the surge in dopamine is higher, which means they get these really intense feel-good feelings, and their baseline dopamine is lower, which explains why they get bored easier, right? This has a lot, when you combine the fact that they're seeking this it feels really, really good. They're seeking this out often. They don't even know what's happening, but they know it feels really good. So they want that experience, they want that thing. Who can blame them, right? So then it becomes like, what is that thing? Now when you combine, like we all want that thing, that experience, but we have a pretty good, hopefully, prefrontal cortex to kind of guide us a little bit, right? Like, that's a good one, I'm going to get it that way. That's probably not so good for me if I do that. Well, if that's not working for them, and they're getting this really intense surge of dopamine in response to experiences, that's a recipe for trouble, right? So that's where a lot of their trouble comes from. They do stupid things because in the moment, it seems really like it's going to feel really good. And it does. And they're not reflecting and thinking about the implications or the possible consequences or how it might affect them in an hour or a day or a week from now, or how it might affect the people around them. So this is really important to understand for adolescents. So here's another kind of framework that I share with kids that was developed by neuroscientist Daniel Siegel and one of his colleagues, David Rock. So this is what the research shows that our brains need for health to be healthy, for healthy integration. Okay, to have a healthy brain, these are the things that neuroscientists have discovered all brains need. This includes every one of us. This is one way to think of balance. We need sleep. We know that adolescents need 9 or so hours of sleep. Most of them are getting like under 7. Like they need more sleep. I always kind of say, I think like half the kids that I see wouldn't need to see me if they got an hour more of sleep a night. I think that would change everything. Phones are getting in the way of sleep, for sure. So that's something we need everyone needs to talk with their kids about. We kind of know that, and so we can, at the end, I'm going to carve out about 15 minutes or so, 20 minutes for questions, by the way, too. Feel free to, if you have a clarifying question as I'm going, feel free to ask. But like that might be an example, like what do we do? You know, I think kids need to have phones out of their room for sure, or at the very least on the other side of their room, so it's not like right by their bed. Physical time is exercise, we know about that. Focus time is about single tasking, focused attention on something. That needs to happen, our brains need that. Time in is about reflecting, looking at ourselves. We need time to just reflect and think about what we're doing, why we're doing it. Downtime is just no agenda, no structure, we're just relaxing. We need downtime. Playtime is just that, playing, being silly, having fun, being goofy, dancing, like just playing. And connecting, of course, is about really connecting with other people. Real time is very different than online time too. But I think both, again, balance. So that's kind of a nice model. It's in the book Brainstorm by Daniel Siegel. But it's kind of a way to like look at, and I encourage you guys to look at, like what are you, most of us are pretty good at 2 or 3 of those and not so good at other ones. So something to kind of think about. It's helped me kind of reflect. All right. Here's another video, just a fun one.
I'm not hungry.
What's wrong, sweetheart?
I miss Daddy.
I know. We all miss him.
I miss him more.
Oh, no, I miss him the most.
I miss him
so much more.
Hey, everyone shut up. This filter makes me look like a cat. It's so funny, it's making me cry.
I got one more of those coming. Common Sense Media is a really good resource. You guys know about that? Yeah. It helps me pretend to be cool because I can look up, like I used to look at, like, what is Snapchat? How's it work? Go to Common Sense Media. Oh, I know what Snapchat is. Yeah, totally. So that's a good resource. All right, let's talk about gaming a little bit. That is an important thing to, that comes up a lot. How many of you guys have kids who were gaming as an issue? A lot? Okay, cool. So this, yeah, this comes up a lot. So I wanted to kind of give you guys some data and some info about gaming. So for one thing, moderate gaming has been shown to improve visual, spatial, and working memory. So there are benefits to gaming, actually, when it's reasonable. I say that because I think I'm counterbalancing a little bit of how, because we can really get negative about gaming, and it can definitely have an addictive quality, but there are positive aspects of it, and again, we're looking at balance here. Kids with ADHD often do have a harder time getting off of games. So if you have a kid who has ADHD and you're like, I just told you 10, like, you said you get off, please, I don't want to remind you like 5 more times, like, please, like, they might literally have a hard time getting off. And so you got to like strategize with them and come up with some plans and kind of understand it might be harder for them. And playing in person with friends is important. It's a big difference. So part of this is thinking, one of the things I want you guys to take away from this is thinking more nuanced about this stuff, not just yes or no, but how, and what are some different ways they can find different ways to be more thoughtful and mindful about how they're using their technology, right? So if they're playing with friends are coming over to the house and they're playing together, that's a lot different than if they're playing with people they don't know online. Not that that's inherently wrong or bad, but that's a big difference. So if we're just talking about how much they're gaming, we should really think about by themselves, with friends, online with people they don't know, like what? You know, and then there's like violence versus creative games versus imaginative games. There's a difference there, right? So thinking a little bit more about that. This is one thing I think we could do better at. Showing genuine interest in their gaming world. That is such an in for building rapport and connection and credibility. We have a foster son. My wife's a therapist as well. He's 22 now, and he joined our family when he was 13. And he had a lot of needs. He had Asperger's and PTSD and a lot of things. And he was really obsessed, really into games. And we were, as both therapists, like really, you know, wanting to just support him and help him have life skills and tools. So for us, at the time, gaming was just sort of like something we had to let him do to kind of just, one, it gave us a break, and it was just like, you know, it's something he wants to do. So we were just like, okay, you can have your 2 hours, and that was that. I never played with him. I never like engaged or like talked to him about it because I just saw it as something that wasn't good for him, but a necessary evil in our lives. I regret that. I regret that quite a bit, actually, because I think that that would have been a good way for me to connect with him, because he was really, to this day, really passionate about gaming and playing games. He definitely might be a little addicted and does it too much, but I have a lot more influence and credibility when I can just talk to him a little bit and show him some genuine interest, and I do that now, and it really makes a difference. And every once in a while, I'll play with him. And I can just see him light up when I do. Like, it means so much to him, because it's hard for him to connect. That's an extreme case, but I think in all situations, like if they were learning a new sport that we'd never heard of and they were really into it, wouldn't we like take some interest in it and learn and like get curious about it? I mean, we probably would, but like for some reason, when they get older and they're into Minecraft and we're like, okay, whatever, I don't really care. But there are some similarities there. Yeah, did you have a question?
You said when it makes a difference, what do you mean exactly? It's like, is their behavior different? Are they less fierce to get off the game, or more participatory in the family setting?
I think it could be potentially all the above. I mean, it's different in every situation, but I think it makes a difference in terms of how they view you, in terms of credibility, in terms of trustworthiness, in terms of like you get them. And then that makes a difference when it's time for you to ask something of them that they don't particularly feel like doing. They're going to be more likely to do it because they're going to remember like you took interest in something that was really important to them, because they're used to people just kind of poo-pooing their games, right? Like a lot of them, like, this is so dumb, it's so bad, it's so violent, it's just so, why are you doing that? Like, why don't you go make friends? Or like, they get so much negative feedback. And so when we can really take it seriously, their interest, and not just see the negative side, but see like some cool stuff, interesting. Even if we're not into it, we don't have to pretend we're into it if we're not. And we can set boundaries. Like in terms of, I'll talk about violent video games, like we can say, I'm not comfortable with that. Like that just makes me, it feels kind of gross, or just it doesn't feel good to me. I'm not willing to play Call of Duty, but I would be up for playing one of your other games, you know, that's like a sport game or that isn't so violent. Like, I think that's totally okay to set that boundary. So speaking of violent video games, this comes up a lot. People ask about this, like, how do we approach it? Or I always feel uncomfortable when I hear middle schoolers playing M-rated games. I just think, just intuitively, I just don't, you know, there's a reason those labels are there. And but there is data on the impact. A lot of people wonder about this because there's kind of both sides. I think, you know, I've heard kind of mixed things, but I did get some clear, there is some clear research on, now again, every kid's different. So there isn't, like, some kids are going to respond to it different, handle it better than others. And if you have kids who are playing M-rated games, and I'm not telling you to like just yank it, because that is going to be counterproductive, because you can't just do that with kids. But you can have conversations like this. So out of the top three things, number 3 in terms of the outcome of violence, and this isn't just games, this is violence, period. Like going to an MMA match in person, or like that, I mean, anything that's violent, Game of Thrones or whatever, for kids. So number 3 is what researchers have found, there's increased aggressive thoughts and behaviors. So that's just, what they see when they do these studies and they show kids a violent game and then they like give them opportunities to play, like they see it. But that's not even in the top two. Number 2, fear and anxiety increases, particularly among kids. And then the number 1 most common outcome is desensitization to the suffering of others. So if kids are watching a lot of violent stuff, doesn't just have to be video games, the concerns more than any other should be about empathy and being able to connect with other people's experience who are suffering. So those are the conversations, and that needs to be the counterbalance, perhaps. If they're doing that, then they also should maybe be doing something else to help maintain their capacity and thoughtfulness about suffering, because there's plenty of it in the world, of course, as we know. All right, so that's gaming. Social media. So the link to mental health issues and the data shows, this is where we do have some data now. The link to mental health issues and unhappiness happens after 2 hours per day. So within 2 hours or less, that doesn't seem to be as much of a problem, but if they're spending 2 hours or more on social media a day, then that's when problems seem to start arising. Average teens check their phone more than 80 times a day. The cool thing with phones, with devices, is like you have all this data. Like it's there, so you can track it. And you can see, like, how often am I checking my phone? How often am I on this app? How often am I? So we can create, and this is what we've been talking about, is like, we can create a baseline and kind of just see, like, how much are we, and I think it starts with us, like, which I'll talk about, but how much are we spending? And let's look at it and see what we can modify or change. It can be really helpful. So it says, "Dear Andy, how are you? Your mother and I are fine. We both miss you and hope you're doing well. We look forward to seeing you again the next time your computer crashes and you come downstairs for something to eat. Love, Mom and Dad." You guys ever had that experience? It's like, hello, we're here. Join us. Feel free to lift your head up. I like that one. So here's another study. The relative risk of being unhappy from 10 or more hours per week of social networking sites. It impacts 8th graders the most. So the younger the kids are, the more the negative impact. So basically this is saying there's like a 55% higher risk for 8th graders spending 10 or more hours a week on social networking sites, a little less than 40% risk 10th graders, and slightly less than 15% for 12th graders. So the younger they are, the worse it is for them. And my theory or hunch about that has to do with 8th graders have a much less mature prefrontal cortex. So they're getting all this input and they don't have the skills to filter it and know what to do with it. Combined with bullying happens more in middle school than it does later. So they're more likely to probably be exposed to negative stuff like that. So that's why I think it's probably more problematic the younger they are. Some of that stuff balances out as they get older. But at all ages, it definitely can be a problem when it gets to be too much. Okay. Just quickly, sexting and cyberbullying. So this might be higher now because this is older. This was like 2010, 2011, but 7% of youth in this survey reported sexting, that they had sexted. So it happens. It may not happen as much as we think it does. The fact is, this generation actually is waiting longer to have sex than previous generations. So they're delaying sexual intercourse for the first time. That doesn't mean they're not hooking up more often and doing other things, but in terms of that, they're doing that less. They're waiting longer. So that part is good. So girls were twice as likely as boys to be victimized by cyberbullying. The risk of cyberbullying was 7 times higher among current or former friends and dating partners. So the implications here are to kind of be thinking about relationship skills, helping them learn dating skills and friendship skills and how to resolve conflict and things like that. It's not always random. It's not generally so random. This was surprising to me, but face-to-face bullying is 3 times as common as online bullying. So it's still a lot more common in person than it is online. But cyberbullying is worse in terms of the impact, the negative impact. So 66% of teens cyberbullied have had at least one suicide risk factor. 57% of those bullied offline have at least one suicide risk factor. So cyberbullying happens less often, but it is a little bit more, has more of an impact. Perhaps because it's harder to get away from that. Okay, let's talk about us. Because at the end of the day, we are their role models, and they're looking to us. And my daughter is getting more and more interested in phones, but I'm not quite there yet. But I'm also well aware of how my wife and I are dealing with our phones, and when we have them out and when we don't. And I'm keenly aware that she's really watching. The younger our kids are, the easier this is. The older they are, the harder it is. But teens tell me all the time, like, they'll get in a car after getting picked up and their parents are like on their phone. Like, we can do this. We mess up on this all the time. Like, we're not always as good of role models as we could be. I think it's important for us to be thoughtful about this. And we're learning too. Like, we don't have to be perfect. Again, with parents, we don't have to be perfect. None of us are. But being more mindful and paying more attention to what we're doing only helps. Oh, wait.
Oh, it's so nice to all be sitting down together. You can tell me something they did today.
I drew a horsey.
Good for you, son.
I started smoking.
I love you too, sweetheart.
I'm selling bongs out of our minivan.
I got a tramp stamp. I'm getting implants. I'm dating your brother.
Uh-huh.
I'm cooking meth in the basement.
Great idea, kiddo. That's why you're so popular at school.
There's more of those online, Common Sense Media or YouTube. Fun thing to watch with your kids too. They love it. They'll crack up. It's kind of a cool, and then you can just start like talking about it, you know? So one of the things that I have been paying more attention to wanting to teach kids about, I want them to learn about, is this thing called the attention economy. You guys familiar with that phrase? It's kind of like a new thing, but it's something we need to know. So it's kind of like with food, you know, the food industry, we got real addicted to sugar and, unhealthy stuff that's in our food. And there's just been sort of a gradual backlash to now we're like, I want to know where that comes from. I want to know what's in there. And now we're like, kind of taking gradually more ownership over what we put in our bodies and what we're consuming. Well, I think that's a direction I'm hopeful that we're going to go in with this. Because right now, there's a lot happening on the other side of those screens that is not designed to be in our best interest. It's designed to keep our attention on our screens. Technologists are making a lot of money, very smart people making a lot of money to keep us on our screens and not get off. And kids are the easiest targets because of their brains and their age and all of the dopamine and all that. Reed Hastings, a Netflix CEO, was quoted to say, "Our biggest competitors are Facebook, YouTube, and sleep." They don't want us to sleep. Like, they're not interested in our well-being. They're trying to figure out how to get us to not sleep as much so we can be on our screens more often. And I appreciate his honesty, but I was like, dang, it's not making you look that great in my eyes. But it's not like he's even necessarily a bad guy, but it's like, that's just how the system is set up. Like, that's the economy. Like, that's what they get paid for. I don't think they're like bad people. It's just, you know, that's how they're evaluated. The only people who refer to their customers as users are drug dealers and technologists. So this is a woman who's a design strategist at Google. So we need to work on informing ourselves and informing our kids about like what's going on here, what they're doing. Because I really believe in this generation, like they want to know what's going on, and when they feel like something's wrong, they're going to stand up for it. And they're not going to want to be manipulated if they feel like they are. And so I think, like, I'm really optimistic about leveraging this for them. You know, Snapchat has streaks. You guys know about that? You get a streak for every day that you snap with your friend. And so, like, you want to keep the streak going. So people get like 200, 300, like, days in a row to get a streak. Like, and it's like a thing. Like, they don't want to break their streak. Snapchat knows what they're doing. Like, that's how they get them to like come back again and again and again. Like, these are ploys. They're not interested in like facilitating like a meaningful friendship. Yes?
So with drug use, would that inhibit the frontal cortex and accentuate the dopamine feed? Do drugs accentuate all these problems, or are they depend on the drug?
I think drugs can definitely accentuate the problems. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, this is sort of a drug. I mean, really, if you look at the factors in terms of, yeah, like what actual drugs do and what this does in terms of you get that dopamine, you want it, you crave it, you get it, you know, and then you want more of it, and you want more of it, and you need more of it, right, to get that same amount of dopamine experience. So, I mean, really, the process is very similar. Although I think one difference is I think moderation and using this effectively can actually be a really beneficial tool, right? I don't know that most drugs, I mean, there are cases, I guess, right? Certain drugs that they can be used as a tool under certain circumstances, but we're so far behind on this stuff when it comes to the adolescent brain. It is just so much more fragile. We have to take care of it. So the new movement that starts with us, it starts with things like Manoush Zomorodi. She wrote a book called Bored and Brilliant, and she has a podcast, a really popular podcast called Note to Self. She talks about spacing out and being bored. And in her book, she writes a lot about the science of spacing out, like literally, I mean, when we're bored, it actually makes us more creative. We come up with good solutions and ideas, and are more innovative. But our phones and our technology are keeping us from being bored. Like, we're never bored. I mean, I was in line at Starbucks the other day, and it was like a minute. What did I do? Like, I pulled out my phone. I didn't need to check my phone. Like, I was nothing, but I just did because it was like something to do. I think we all have a tendency to do that. Yeah.
Name in the podcast.
Yeah. Manoush Zomorodi and Note to Self. Yeah, is the name of the podcast. She's really fun. She's not anti-tech either, but she's really supportive of this movement that we need to have, where we're thinking more about how to use technology in positive ways as a tool. And so she also references a guy who's kind of on the leader. Who's leading this, one of the leaders of this movement, Tristan Harris, who has humanetech.com is a website that he came up with. He's a former design ethicist at Google. So he's kind of like understands the design, and he's a former engineer. He has that background. So that's where he's coming from, and he's all about like, we are being worked over here by these, good people, but they're just incentivized to keep our attention. They're not trying to, but that's just the economy right now of how it works. And we need to create a different model if we're going to create different kinds of design. A model that's more about building positive relationships and improving our lives, which is not what it is right now. So humanetech.com, and he's got some really cool articles. I think schools, it would like having a group or a club that's about like a humane tech club where kids come together and talk about, I think that's going to happen. I think there's going to be a backlash at a certain point, and teens are going to be like, Like, I'm not bringing my phone. I don't want my phone. Like, I don't want to be all caught up in this. I think that's going to happen. So this is an example of like his design. Like, why don't we have things that are like, what you might not be able to read is in the blue. So this is like a Gmail inbox. And then in the blue it says, or right underneath the inbox number it says, really? Didn't you just check 10 seconds ago? What if we had that kind of design, right? That would go on for me all the time. Like, why are you checking it? You just checked it. You don't need to check it again. But they don't, right now as it is, they want us to check it again and again. Just keep coming back as much as possible. So I think when we learn more about that, one way to do that is to increase our mindfulness. I was talking about that, of like, what are we doing? So if you have an iPhone, I'm sure you can do this on an Android, you go to settings and battery, and then you can do the last week or the last 3 days. It takes like a second. And this is my screenshot. Like I did this like a few months ago. How much time we spend on each of our apps and what percentage over the last week. It's that simple. Take a screenshot, there's your baseline. And then you can just track it and just be curious and then maybe like set a goal. So one of the things that she does is, Manoush Samarodi in her book, she has and through her podcast, the Bored and Brilliant Challenge is what she calls it. The Bored and Brilliant Challenge is for 1 week, every day you do something different related to cutting back on your phone. So one day might be no pictures for a day. Another day might be remove your favorite app for that day. Another day would be a staycation, she calls it, where you are off the grid for like a few hours or maybe a day, so no one can reach you. And you try these different things, and it's a challenge. Like, people have done it, and there's like 7 different ones. And then at the end, you just have to be bored for like a day or a few hours, and you're supposed to. One of the challenges in that period is you like turn on boiling water and you watch it boil. And then the last day you've done all that, then you just go like have no technology, you're offline, and then you like think of like a challenge in your life that you want to work through, and you just try to like reflect on it. So, and there's an app called Moment that she's collaborated with, and they have like reminders for that. They're like, hey, don't forget to, take off your app today. But Moment also is an app that you can put on your phone, and it'll just tell you like how much screen time you're using. And I think doing this in a proactive way, like is a great thing to do as a family. Like, let's all do this. Let's do this together. Too often, phones become sort of a punitive, like a punishment sort of a thing, right? And it becomes like this us versus them, and do this together. Be willing to remove your favorite app for the weekend. Ask them to do the same. Track together. Let's see. Like, let's look at our phones right now and let's see what we're doing. When I have kids do this, they're often surprised. They're like, whoa, I didn't know I was on Instagram that much. Like, because we don't realize it, because we do it so much. So it's like, I really recommend doing this, but doing this in kind of a collaborative way, like no stress, like, because they're really sensitive to being like busted or getting harped on their phones too much. So be conscious of that. And try to just do it in like a positive, kind of lighthearted way. Yeah?
So if you have 10 apps open in the background, does it think you're paying attention to them, or does it know that they're in the background and you're not paying attention to them?
Well, this one says in the background, your iPhone app. I don't know about Moment than that, but yeah. But I think those are things to just, again, conversations, being thoughtful, paying it, just even the act of doing that just created more mindfulness and awareness that they didn't have before. Even if the numbers are off the charts, like just notice, at least know they're off the charts. And then we can do something with it. But a lot of kids, they get so caught up and they're so busy and impulsive and they don't even know it. So really it's slowing it down for them. Okay, mentorship. Mentorship is another term we want to think about in terms of supporting kids. So Alexandra Samuel she's a digital author and did a large North American study of like 10,000 parents, and she's a parent herself. And she came up with she asked them about how they parent around technology, and she came up with 3 different styles of parents from her data. So the first word she referred to as digital enablers. So these were parents, so lots of screen time and access to devices, little involvement, and few boundaries. 43% of parents with teens fell into this category in her data. Digital limiters. So those are parents who focus on limiting screen time, turning off devices whenever possible. 22% of parents with teens fell into that. And the third category that she found were digital mentors. They take an active role in guiding their kids on the internet, and those were 35% of parents with teens. So digital mentors, again, in her data and her studies, were more likely to talk with their children about how to use technology, the internet, or a specific website responsibly. By the way, as you can tell, this is where we're going. This is where we want to get to. Digital mentors research specific devices, programs, or apps they're considering for their child. They enroll their child in class, camp, or workshop to improve their tech skills. Hopefully there will be more of these available over time. But like I said, I think this would be a cool thing to have in every school, like a club. And that book could be a book that everyone reads, Manoush Marodi's book. Play video games with their children. They're more likely to play video games with their children, so I've talked about that. Compared to mentors, limiters and enablers are significantly more likely to have kids who deliberately or accidentally accessed online pornography, engaged in an online chat or email exchange with someone they didn't know, posted rude or hostile comments about somebody online, impersonated their parent or another adult online, impersonated a classmate or peer online. So mentorship is really where we want to go, is the mindset. It's learning with them. Sometimes we have to let go of our own need for control and accept that they might know more than us in some ways, which can be humbling, but can also be, it can help them feel grown up if we can come at them with more of a collaborative approach. So mentorship is important, and that's what we want to work towards, talking, having conversations. Conversations are key. And that requires listening, and that requires empathy. I think one of the ways that we get stuck as parents, I know I do sometimes, is we think we know, right? And we get stuck in our own lens and our own way of thinking. My daughter, 9, just the other day, she goes to Hebrew school on Saturdays where she learns Hebrew, and she does not like going. But she's kind of got to go. It's one of those things. So the other day, she was like, we've been going for a while, and it's okay, and she usually does fine. She's like, I'm not going. I don't want to go. And it was like an hour or two before we had to go, and I was like, okay. In my mind, I'm like, I've heard this before. I get it. I know you don't like it. It's something you got to do. You got to go. So I'm like, okay, well, I understand, but it's something we got to do. We all got to do things we don't like sometimes, and that's just how it goes. No, I'm not going. She started getting her amygdala. I'm not going. I'm just not going. I'm not going to go today. I'm not going. So then I started to kind of go into that, like, you are going to go, first of all. Like, that is going to happen. That's the expectation. And, and she got stuck, and I started getting stuck, right? And I could see us going down a path that was not going to be great for either of us. So what I was able to do, and I'm not always able to, but what I was able to do was slow down. I slowed myself down, and I thought, okay, let me try to see where she's coming from, because I might be missing something here. So I said, Leia, come here. And she reluctantly kind of came over the couch, plopped down. And I was like, I slowed down, lowered my tone. I was like, what's going on with Hebrew school? Is there something you're worried about? Or what's going on? And I was really open to it, maybe I'm missing something. And she was like, well, I'm learning Mandarin in school, regular school, and I'm learning Hebrew school, and it's just too many things. And last time they called on me and I answered in Mandarin, and everyone was like, what? And it was so embarrassing, and I just don't want to do it. Bingo, I figured it out. Oh, got it. So it was you had experience where you answered in wrong language and you felt really embarrassed and self-conscious, and you don't want to do that again. That makes a lot of sense. And then I was able to kind of explain, oh, that totally happens all the time, and you know how sometimes I call you by your brother's name, and Like, that's totally normal, you know, all that. And she like calmed down, she said what it was, but it took me, right, like what I almost didn't do, to like slow down and empathize, right? In order to empathize, I had to be curious. We lose our curiosity sometimes as parents because we kind of like we think we just know, right? And then we just sort of stop listening. And so we got to get better. I think we can all always improve. It's an ongoing process of like having more empathy, really trying to understand what they like or don't like, what's going on for them. And curiosity and empathy go together. Because by me having more curiosity about her experience, she explained it, and now I have so much more empathy for her. Like, oh yeah, that would be really hard. And I could see how that could be embarrassing. And then when I have more empathy, it lends itself to more curiosity, right? I can ask more questions. So empathy and curiosity, really important. And then prioritize conversations. I'm not a fan of taking phones away. I don't think it teaches. I think it leads to more anger and resentment. And it just delays the inevitable. I think our job, which is they jump through the hoops, they get their phone back, and then what? They're going to try to not get caught. This is what I see more often than not next time. And what is our goal? We want to teach. We want to teach this prefrontal cortex to work a little bit better, right? So the way we do that is through conversations. Conversations involve me really understanding and listening and trying to understand your perspective. Conversation also involves you getting me. Like, try to put yourself in my shoes too. How do you think that was for me? Conversation involves problem solving. What can we do to help prevent this from happening next time? That is going to teach. It's harder. It takes more time. It doesn't give us that, like when we're angry, we want power and control and we want them to like suffer. We want them to learn a lesson, but that's like our anger and we're not teaching. So when they mess up, my recommendation is you can have that privilege back as soon as we can have a conversation. And that conversation involves me listening to you, but you also listening to me, and us coming up with an agreement for moving forward. That isn't perfect. It's not going to be exactly what I want. It's not going to be exactly what you want, but we're going to meet somewhere that can be good enough for both of us. And it's going to be based on me knowing what your needs are, like what's really important to you, and my concerns also being addressed. And we're going to work that out and figure that out. And we're going to try it. And if that doesn't work, we'll come back and we're going to have another conversation. Every conversation is building prefrontal cortex, right? It's getting them better at reflecting, at thinking. Being stuck in their room without a phone, being pissed off, is not teaching them, and it's not facilitating their prefrontal cortex. So that's my quick on that. Okay. Tristan Harris, who I talked about with the ethical engineering and design in his movement, here are some recommendations that he has in terms of tactical stuff with the phone. Get rid of social media off of phones. So that you can use it on the desktop, but that way it's just not so there all the time. You have to make a little bit of effort to get to it and do it. These are just kind of small little tactical things. Get rid of notifications. Those little red circles are designed to capture our attention, get us to react. Grayscale, that's kind of a cool thing. You can do that on your phone really easily. I was messing with that. And then you can set it up and then you just double click to grayscale, double click again to make it colorful. But the color is also attractive to us, so it makes us so, these are just kind of interesting ideas. Use your home screen just for tools, just for the things that you like actually use. And again, what the point, the idea is put a little more thought before we click on something, before we open an app. So there's like one more step, a swipe and then click on an app. Just that much more reflection into it. Here's just some other things to consider. And again, you guys all send this out to you. So removing your favorite app for the weekend. Talked about that. Phones out of sight during dinner. Phones charged in the kitchen by 9:30, I just said, but an hour or so, because the blue light is really bad for our sleep. Blue light reduces melatonin by up to 25%, melatonin production. Single tasking. So when we multitask, it decreases efficiency by, it makes homework take between 25% and 400% longer when we're multitasking. Multitasking is terrible. It's a bad idea.
Listening to music while they're doing homework.
It depends. Listening to music while they're doing homework. Some kids it works, some kids it doesn't. And what kind of music also matters a lot, right? So.
But they say they're using their phone for music and they're really not.
Yeah. They're just like they also say they need their phone for their alarm clock. Yeah, because they don't really they haven't invented alarm clocks yet. Yeah. They have to have their phone. Yeah. They have Bluetooth speakers for that kind of thing. Setting individual goals as a family based on usage stats. So, you could be like, oh yeah, so I notice I'm on Facebook quite a bit. You're on Instagram quite a bit. Let's set a goal that we cut back 10% or a certain amount, on our, just something to do as a family. The more you can do it proactively together, the more effective it's going to be. Text when you arrive and the time you expect to be home if you're running late. That's just sort of an expectation or request you can make. Okay. All right. So, questions? Got a little bit of time. Yes?
Go back to the last slide. So you're comment about setting a goal.
Yeah.
So if you're going to do that, how do you justify not being the one that is about to tell them they've gone down the wrong path? We can admit it collectively as a family, but how do you approach that? In other words, if we're going to cut back on our time as a family, perhaps give us some sense of the best way to approach that without coming across as being I'm now the phone police officer that I usually am. What's the best way to begin a dialogue about that? Sort of leaving this meeting and going home and saying to my daughter, I've just attended this meeting, tomorrow's a new day, and here we go.
Yeah. So you got to build a little bit of credibility and say, okay, so I went to this talk, and it was about devices, and there were some interesting things. So one of the things that he showed us was this. You probably know about this already, but did you ever go to settings in your battery and look at your screen? Because I thought that was kind of a cool idea. So would you be willing to do that? So one of the thoughts I had was, this isn't about right or wrong. You're not in trouble. I think as a family, we could all benefit from just paying more attention to our phones, because I think I'm not great at it either. You build credibility if you can take responsibility, and you say, I'm doing this too. So here's what I want to do. Here's my thought. You tell me what your idea is. My thought is, I would like us all let's all take screenshots and look at what our data is, our phone usage is, and then let's all set a goal.
Just a quick follow-up, but that assumes that what they're doing is wrong. Which if not necessarily wrong, but the perception of the dialogue is that the reason why we're doing this collectively is we're trying to explain to them there's a reason here. So
I think it's safe to assume that we all could improve on our phone usage.
And I think that's an easy thing to say. I'm trying to figure out how to back my way into the conversation.
Yeah.
Of basically going to the very beginning of your point of, this is a way to dialogue. I'm just trying to get some sense of real-time feedback on the best way to back myself into this conversation.
Yeah.
Where I'm not the phone police.
Right.
I can admit exactly to all the things that you say I'm on mine too much, but I have to give my daughter a reason why that's a problem, and I don't have the benefit of sitting her down and walking her through a slideshow. Nor do I expect you to answer me in the next seconds. The best way to do it, but I'm looking.
Because she might be like, everything's fine. Why would I do anything different?
Why what?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, even though for the last however long I've been commenting, there's too much time on Instagram, there's too much Snapchat. Now I'm.
So there might already be a culture where she's like, the second your mouth open, your lips move, she's defensive, right?
I think I'm in a common culture right now of that.
Yeah.
So
So you're going to be, it might be a few steps to get to that point of building credibility where you're asking questions and trying to understand and be more curious and having her feel less judgment, which you might be feeling. Or just it's just bad, you need to get off Instagram. show me some. I bet you do cool stuff on Instagram. Like, I'm genuinely curious about like some of the things you do, you know, or some things you're proud of, some things you've posted, because I feel like I've probably have been overly negative at times, and that's mostly what you've heard from me. And I can understand why you'd be like hesitant to like want to talk to me about it because you think I'm going to get on you. But I want to work on not being on you so much, and I'm actually just want to like get it a little bit more because I think I'm missing out stuff. I bet you do some really cool, interesting things online, and I want to work on like understanding that a little bit better. And she'll soften, and at first she might be like, okay, what's the scam here? What are you trying to do? But if you're sincere and you just like, that's just your philosophy, which I think it should be, like, it's not all bad. They're doing a lot of cool stuff and positive things online, and they don't get any credit from us generally for that. So like being more interested in that. And then it's like, you'll just start talking more, and then you'll be like, have you heard of this book? Like, it's really interesting. Like, would you be willing to read it? I was thinking we could do this as a family. This would be a cool thing. But you got to get her to that point, probably. Yeah. Yes.
This is kind of a follow-up. First of all, I appreciate your putting communication front and center because as I think about how I react oftentimes to screens, I'm reflexively pretty negative. And I allow them to kind of isolate themselves in their screens, and then it's sort of war, and I'm like, you know, trying to wait it out, or finally I just come in and take them away. And I notice my husband isn't quite so much like that. He's more inclined to move into their space, and then they start talking, and then they start talking about other things, and then, you know, I'm even madder then. But I do see the point that he was making before, that at some point, even if you get to the point where you're aligned and you're all chummy and you're talking about how great Instagram can be and all of that, at some point you're going to hit a wall because they're going to be on Instagram 7 hours a day, and you're saying, wow, you know, Instagram's great, but someone has to set a line, and even if you've built that rapport and you've built up that credibility, it can't take you all the way there sometimes.
So at the end of the day, they may not be able to set their own limits yet. And so you do need to set limits, and you can show, like, but have a conversation. Here's my concern. There's some data, some research that says 2 hours is kind of the number for social media. My concern is like you're spending more than 2 hours. Kids respond well when there's reasoning, when there's logic, not when it's just like I'm pulling rank. This is just how it is because I have a personal vendetta and I'm just an old curmudgeon. But when it's like, there's some data that 2 hours or more on social media impacts happiness and well-being. And so I'm going to follow that, just like I would follow health guidelines from the dentist. And so I want to know your thoughts. I'm totally open to it, and I'll show you that data. Jean Twenge, iGen, is a book where she talks about that. But this is what I'm thinking. I think for all of us, you know. And then if it's like, no, like that's so dumb, like you can't, blah, 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 like then there might be some other problems around just we need to be able to sit and have conversations and tell me what your concerns are about that. Tell me what's so important about Instagram for you, why that feels like it'd be really hard, what would you be missing out on. Like, stay curious. You know, don't just put your foot down because even though it probably would be, but if they're used to 7 and now you're like 2, like that's going to be hard for them. So you want to try to like, that doesn't mean you don't like stick with the 2, but like cut them a little slack, ease into it, have a conversation, hear them out. A lot of times they just want to be heard. Like, just hear me out. And then it's like, okay, but we don't hear them out, you know? So like, what is so important for you? Like, would you miss friends? Do you feel like they're going to make plans without you? Do you feel like you're, you know, like I just really want to know because this research seems like pretty important, you know, and I want you to be really happy and, you know, it's a process. It's not going to be like a one-shot deal, but it's more creating that culture in your family of empathy and asking questions and solving problems together versus kind of a authoritarian, kind of this is how it's going to be. Yes?
What I thought I heard was for the younger kids, they shouldn't be on social media.
Well, certainly not that much. That one stat was 10 plus hours a week, and for 8th graders. You know, I was thinking about this too. Like, Facebook has this new social media app for like young kids. You guys heard about this? Where it requires parents to like give permission to chat, and both parents on each side. And you know, part of this is like on one hand, I was like, what? We're indoctrinating them? Like, what a horrible idea at such a young age. On the other hand, you know, it brings up the question too of like, when should they get a phone, right? But sometimes we just think in terms of like black or white. And so I think the way to think about it with younger kids is like in terms of training wheels. That the advantage of younger kids is we have influence with them, right? And we, in a way that we don't with older kids. If we can start them early, maybe with a flip phone, or if there is, I haven't really looked at this social media site, but if it is very simple and they're sitting with you, maybe we can teach them how to be ethical and responsible, how to respond to certain kinds of things, how to ignore certain kinds of things, how to have balance, how to recognize when enough is enough and to do other things. You know, how to just be responsible, because a lot of this is just about being responsible. Being able to be aware enough of their bodies and their minds to say, okay, I'm done. I want to go to bed. This is stressing me out. Like, I need to cut back on this. That takes a level of self-awareness too, and that's a skill to be learned. That's part of what we're helping them learn. So I think if they're younger and they are on social media, like middle school, I think we need to be on, we probably need to have their passwords and be on them, but hopefully in a collaborative, positive way. Like, let's do this together. Let me help you navigate what to do. What if that kid sent something that was kind of mean? What do you think would be the way to respond to that, or should you? You know, how does that feel?
With a child with post-traumatic stress, as you mentioned, he seems a little older, so he might not have been on social media. With their anxiety and their hard beginnings, their brains are wired a little different. So the social media, I think, is a bigger hit for them. You know what I'm saying? So would a child with trauma be treated differently?
Yes. I think the online life mirrors the offline life world. Meaning, I'm going to pass, if you guys are interested, I'm going to answer your question. I'm just going to pass this out. If you're interested in signing up for my newsletter just to stay in touch, I'm just going to pass those back. You don't have to if you don't want to, but I write articles and I do different things to stay connected. So their online life mirrors their offline life. So if they have poor boundaries in real friendships, they're probably going to have poor boundaries with online friendships. You know, if they're impulsive offline, they're going to be more likely to be impulsive online, you know, like, so, yeah. Other questions? Yes.
So a friend at work, and this is a story from Oregon, so everybody's safe. So he took his phone away from his daughter. She was a junior in high school. And he caught her texting the next night. And he's like, what are you doing? And she finally coughed up that there was a grounded phone. And the grounded phone is that her and her friends just pass it around. And before they turn the phone into the parent, they just take the SIM card out. And they put the SIM card into the grounded phone, and then their week without the phone is crammed. And then by the time they're off, they hand the grounded phone to the next person who loses their phone.
Yeah.
They're probably smarter than we are.
Oh, on this stuff? They are, I think, unless you happen to be a technologist yourself. But this is why I talk about conversations so much, you guys, because like we get into this, it's so easy to get into this cat and mouse game, and they're going to win, right? It becomes like, I'm going to monitor you, and we haven't really talked about that, like monitoring and checking on them, you know, and taking their stuff away, and then they get it from another person, and then it just becomes this frustrating thing, you know? And so being able to talk about things, and again, if you're not used to it, it's going to take time because they don't often know, but we want to get them problem solving. We want to get them thinking. We want to get them reflecting and work together as a team. Because if it just becomes about how can I restrict you and how can you not get caught, that's a tough game. That's tough. So I think that's a good point. Other questions? What about monitoring? No one brought that up. That's the thing that comes up a lot in terms of, should I monitor my kids? Can I check their phone and check their messages? I'll tell you my thoughts about that. So if you're checking their texts and checking their messages and they don't know, you have to be prepared. Like, what if you find something? What are you looking for, first of all? Second of all, what are you going to do if you find that thing? What happens if or when you discover some concerning behavior? Are you going to tell them? Are you just going to not tell them because you don't want to break the trust, but then you're going to just be have a lot of anxiety and stress? It's a tough, if you kind of it's a setup kind of in a way, you know? So my suggestion on that is honesty at all times, like be open. If you have reasons to check their phone or check their room or anything, like tell them and be upfront about it. Let them know. Because you're going to have credibility and trust. That way, if you're not checking their phone and you're not checking then you can say, I'm not looking at your phone and I'm not going through your room, and they'll believe you because you can say, if I was, you would know it. I'm going to tell you. So, and if you don't have specific, like very good reason to be concerned, I would recommend that you not do it. Give them their space. That's kind of like their mall, hanging out at the mall in a way when they're online. So I think they need to have that, if at all possible. If they're struggling though, and you have legitimate reasons to be concerned, then I think you have every right to figure out what's going on and check, but let them know. I'm going to check your phone every once in a while, or I'm going to be checking your room and going through it right now because I am really concerned about how you're doing and your well-being. Like, I'm concerned about your safety. I'm concerned about, and I don't want to always do it. I don't like it. It's a pain. It sucks. But like, I want us to get past this. And so we're going to keep working on this. But in the interim, like, I'm going to do it. If you're doing it and they don't know, and once they find out, it's going to be, everyone's going to take some steps backwards. It's going to be hard. They're going to be frustrated. And so just tell them. You have the right to do that.
It varies by app, of course.
What's that?
It varies by app, your ability to do that.
It varies by app.
It varies by app. Like Snapchat is a hard one to sort of bounce along and follow what happens.
Yeah.
It's your child's choice on how they communicate as a group, on how you're able to monitor that.
Yeah. I mean, there's only so much, because you can buy devices. I mean, it's just, again, yeah, relationship, collaboration is your bet, because it is hard. I mean, you're just going to be spinning wheels eventually. They're going to, so. Well, I really appreciate you guys' time and attention. This was super fun. I hope we'll stay in touch. If you saw the newsletter, I write articles with tips and things like that, and I give different talks and different things. I'd love to stay in touch. If you have any questions, I'll get this out to Jennifer and get more info to you. I'll hang out for a few minutes if you guys have questions or whatever. So thanks for your attention and your time.
A couple of things. One, I want you to be aware of our next wellness presenter will be here April 10th, and his name is Howard Heighton, and he'll be talking about competitiveness and high expectations.
Howard's great. I know him well.
I do too.
He's
and
really
he is
good.
Great.
That'll be good.
And he talks about how to build independence and resilience in your kids.